finally almost here. The PolyMega, the system that started its life known as Retro Blocks, and with some hiccups along the way, took pre-orders in early 2019. For those that may not be familiar, the PolyMega is an all-in-one retro console that has an optical CD drive built in. The base unit is capable of playing different retro systems such as the Sega CD, Neo Geo CD, Sony PlayStation, TurboGrafx CD, and notably the Sega Saturn. And with the optional add-on modules, NES, Super NES, Mega Drive, Genesis, 32X, TurboGrafx, and PC Engine cartridge-based systems are all supported. But let's get one thing clear right off the bat. This system is not FPGA. It's 100% emulation. But this is different from just the average Raspberry Pi setup. PolyMega comes on a custom Intel x86 motherboard architecture and from a ground-up developed UI. The emulation cores are fully licensed and are continuing to be tweaked for as close as 100% compatibility as possible. Also, the system claims that it's low latency, and the goal of this product is to be a simple to use all-in-one retro console for the living room. It runs at 1080p on any modern display. So I want to let you guys know about my history with the PolyMega. I first pre-ordered the system about 18 months ago now. It's been quite a while since I pre-ordered the system. I was initially skeptical about it. I thought it was just a Raspberry Pi with a CD drive attached to it, kind of like the ill-fated CD system that was announced, a couple of years ago now. But it turns out that this was a more professionally developed product. It uses a custom Intel motherboard, and it has emulation cores that are being actively developed and worked on by some of the best emulation developers out there. So all of a sudden, it got me a lot more interested about the product. And then last year at E3, I visited the PolyMega booth and got hands-on with the system, got to play with it, got a chance to try out some of the different systems, and specifically the Saturn emulation was something I was very interested in taking a look at. And I left E3 with really good feelings about the system. And here we are today. PolyMega have sent me a beta review unit to take a look at, and we're going to unbox it, take a look at it on the channel, play some games, look at the emulation, do some comparisons. So I hope you guys really enjoy this look at the PolyMega system. This is the first time that I've experienced the system since E3 last year, so I'm very interested to take a look and see how this performs. Internally, the system is powered by an Intel Coffee Lake S-Series processor, 2GB of DDR4 RAM, both onboard gigabit and wireless Ethernet, 32GB of eMMC flash memory, and an M2 SSD and micro SDXC expandable storage. The slot in optical drive is an 8-speed DVD and CD-ROM drive. PolyMega sent out a beta unit for me to take a look at, so please be aware what you see today will not be the final version of the product. The one that they sent me has clearly been used before, and you should expect a brand new product if you bought one. With that said, when we unbox the unit, we can see the console, a controller, an HDMI cable, wireless USB receiver, power brick, and a power cord. The console is quite chunky in size, but I certainly like the form factor. On the right hand side is an eject switch. This is to remove and swap in and out any of the optional cartridge modules. On the back, there is the power connector, HDMI output, wired gigabit network connection, and SD card slot. Then next to that is the exhaust fan for the system. On the front is the optical drive slot, 2 USB 3.0 ports, and the power switch. The controller that comes with the base system is a bit of a mixed bag. It's decent but not great. It has nice weight to it, but I can't help but think that it feels a little cheap. I do really like the analog controls and the triggers, but I'm not big on the D-pad, which feels a little too plasticky. Also, it's 2.4 GHz wireless with a USB receiver, so there undoubtedly will be input lag, but it's also possible just to connect it up with the USB cable into the front of the PolyMega. PolyMega is adding additional USB support for many third-party options, but for the purposes of my testing, I'm using the stock controller plugged in via USB. When we turn the system on, first impressions are good. I really like the UI, which is nice and clean and simple to use. The first thing I did was set my Wi-Fi, but one thing that isn't obvious is if you're actually connected to it. It would be nice to have some icon that indicates connectivity. Another minor nitpick is that you really need to push the disk far into the drive before it pulls it in automatically. It is a little weird and it does take some getting used to. but after a few seconds of drive access, you can launch and play any game. If you have enough storage, you can even install the game as an ISO image on the hard drive. You also note that it pulls in the artwork and assets for the game and even the correct region. You can also install IPS and cheat patches. Translation patches for games should also work fine, and it's a cool feature. I really do appreciate the install to storage option. Once installed, you never need your original disc again. It means for collectors or preservationists, or just people that have expensive Sega Saturn games for example, you'll have peace of mind knowing that your discs aren't being used. But if you prefer, you can just play with the game in the disk drive as normal. Either way, it works well, and it's a nice choice to have. Again, I want to stress that this is a beta test. There is an active list of known bugs and issues, and the team is currently working hard to get everything ready for launch. But with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at some gameplay footage. First up has to be Sega Saturn, and let me tell you off the bat, it's impressive. The emulation core it's using is Mednafen, and a custom in-house HLE BIOS has been developed specifically for the PolyMega. Panzer Dragoon runs very well, and the sound is excellent. Sega Rally also runs very nicely, but I did notice the occasional pop or hiccup of sound. And then when I tried Virtua Fighter 2, it runs great, and even displayed interlacing, which actually surprised me. When I asked PolyMega about this feature, they mentioned that they developed an internal interlace effect. I gotta say, it looks really good. I also tested Fighter's Megamix, and the effect is very authentic. Nice touch. One game that has always had trouble running under emulation is Die Hard Arcade, and again, it runs great without any noticeable problems. Astal is another Sega Saturn game that's had problem under emulation in the past. It looks and runs very well on the PolyMega. You can also tell that a lot of time has been spent on Sega Saturn, and it's fantastic to see. One of my picks, Darius Gaiden, handles the background texture transitions quite well. Oh, and the fake Sega Saturn transparency effects work nicely too. Sega Saturn emulation is good, but it's not perfect. Virtua Fighter Remix is notorious for having issues under emulation, and here is no exception. Check out the flicker and graphical issues on the ground.
Ready, go!
Overall, very pleased with this so far. Things are looking good. One thing that I did notice is sometimes I wanted to switch the controller to analog. Doing this is simple enough. In the game, just select the PolyMega button on the controller and then switch the controller type to analog. It almost works every time, but in some cases it doesn't, and I'm not really sure why. Another nitpick is, if you switch to analog, you can no longer use the D-pad. What would be really cool is just to have both of them enabled and then let the user decide. I also want to discuss the filtering options of the PolyMega, and there are three. HDMI, which is the 1080p integer scaled and unfiltered, looks about as you would expect. Then there is RGB and composite. These filters are quite authentic looking CRT scanline filters that actually look quite good to the eye. Here is an example of all three of them in action. Let me know what you think. Next up, the Neo Geo CD emulation. This one uses MAME and a custom HLE BIOS, and I gotta say, first thing I noticed is that the loading times are completely eliminated. Very nice work. Metal Slug 2 runs exactly how I expect it to, complete with the slowdown in all the right places. I did notice some pixel artifacting or glitching on level 1 in this section of the game that I'm pretty sure doesn't exist on the original hardware. I'll definitely need to go back and revisit. Another game I tried is one of my favourites, Viewpoint. As expected, it looks and sounds excellent. Neo Geo CD uses the YM2160, the sound emulation which I'm told is custom developed by the PolyMega team. There are a couple of nitpicks that I have with the Neo Geo CD emulation, however. First, you can't set controls to analog, not really sure why, and you also can't set a save state. I understand there is more complexity involved in saving state for a CD-based system, but it really needs to be there. Otherwise, no issues here at all. Neo Geo CD emulation runs extremely well, and I'm very happy to see it as a part of the PolyMega system. Moving on to the PlayStation 1, this one again is using Mednafen, with an in-house developed HLE BIOS. Like the Sega Saturn, it handles the interlacing. Check out Tekken 3 for example. But because of the inherent dithering on the PlayStation 1, you can notice the vertical lines are standing out more than they really should be. It's something that can be seen in Tekken 3 and Tobal 2. One cool feature may be an option just to disable the interlacing, but again, this is a minor nitpick and I really do like the effect. Most games that I tried on the PlayStation 1 all worked, and they looked and played great. I also know that there is a small list of PS1 games that have trouble under emulation, and I'll definitely be testing more in the coming days. Overall, PolyMega PS1 compatibility is very high, but it's not perfect. For example, when I tried to run Ace Combat, it didn't load at all, it just sat there with a black screen. And then when moving over to Sega CD, when I tried two random Sega CD games from my collection, The Terminator and Pitfall, both of them are not playable. But fortunately there is a solution to this. You see, due to licensing, PolyMega can't supply BIOS files from these game consoles. Instead, they have developed their own custom BIOS replacements or HLE BIOSes, as in the case with Neo CD and PlayStation 1. But if you own the system, you can just supply your own official BIOS files. To do this, simply copy them to the SD card and then insert the card into the back of the PolyMega. And now you can use the official BIOS files, which made Ace Combat, The Terminator and Pitfall all work perfectly. PolyMega's focus is increasing compatibility on their own BIOSes, which is the right approach, but it's nice that you can just fall back to the official BIOS for the system if your game doesn't work. Another interesting feature of the PolyMega is the ability to load patches. This is great for things like English translations, ROM hacks, and other things. To load a patch, just copy it to your SD card, and then when you load the game, select Install Patch. For example, this English translation patch for Tobal 2 can be applied to the game. Very simple and easy to do. So a couple more things. Are 4MB Sega Saturn games supported? The answer is yes. The 4MB module is enabled automatically for all games that support it, so there are no issues there at all. And the next question might be, can you swap discs on multi-disc games? Yes, you can. For example, playing Parasite Eve, when the game asks you for disc 2, simply jump into the menu, select console, and then select insert disc 2, and you should be good to go. PolyMega has indicated that they'd rather not have the system opened up by the beta testers, but you know what? This is me, this is my channel. I want to see what's inside this thing. I'm sure you guys do as well. So let's go ahead and open up the system and take a look at the internals and see what's going on. So this is the inside of the PolyMega system. This is a custom Intel x86 architecture. This is the Intel Coffee Lake CPU. We've got the radio Wi-Fi device here. And this is a motherboard that essentially just runs x86, but as you can see, this is completely custom made. This is not any type of ATX or micro ATX form factor or anything like that. You've also got your CD-ROM storage here as well, and it's connected via standard SATA to the SATA bus. There's also an additional connector here that's not being used. And on the underside of the console is the additional M2 SSD slot for additional storage. This is a nice touch. It's been a very long wait, but the PolyMega will release in June, and there is still much work to be done by the team. Right now, for example, PC Engine compatibility is the weakest at only 60%. PolyMega tells me that this will significantly be increased by May to over 90%. And speaking of updates, there is a simple method to update the software on the PolyMega in the main menu. So as a beta tester, I'm happy to provide feedback so this product can improve, as I'm sure it will. I also want to mention that I did not receive any of the add-on modules, so at this time I can only test out the CD-based games. If and when we receive any of the cartridge modules, I'll be sure to make a follow-up. especially with Sega 32X, and to determine if EverDrive cartridges are indeed supported. So overall, I'm very pleased with the system. It's certainly not perfect, but for what it does very well. Sega Saturn for me is the absolute standout, and for that alone, it would probably make it worth it. On the hardware side, aesthetically, it's very well built, it's quite nice, but there are some nitpicks I have. The controller could be a better controller, I feel. The front-loading CD drive could be a little more responsive as far as pulling the disc in, and just some other minor nitpicks with the hardware itself. But with great Neo Geo CD, PlayStation 1, Sega CD, Turbo Graphics, and all the cartridge add-on modules, a very clean and easy to use interface, I'm quite pleased. It's an all-in-one retro station that works very well. I'm a backer of the product and I'm not wanting a refund. I definitely think there is much to like about the PolyMega, and I think you guys will as well. So there are my thoughts about the PolyMega. I'm pretty excited about the system. It's a great system. The Saturn emulation is pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. The PlayStation 1, the Sega CD, the Neo Geo CD emulation is also very, very well done. There was a couple quirky things here and there that I noticed, but overall, I'm very satisfied with the system. It's something that has been in development for a long time. A lot of love and care and attention has been put into this, and I think it really shows in the final product. This is something that will replace a lot of retro systems that I have laying around in my living room, and this is essentially an all-in-one retro system that is something that is essentially just plug and play. You can pretty much put any game into this from the supported list and it will work, and it will work well, and that's really what I'm looking for, and I'm sure many consumers and backers of the PolyMega are looking for as well. So yes, I'm very pleased with the product. I'm going to continue to do more testing, and there'll probably be a follow-up video to this because there were some games that I wanted to test that I've purchased on eBay that have still not yet arrived. And so I want to definitely do more testing on the system with some of the more edge cases with some of the games that I know may not work too well on emulation. So stay tuned, there will be a follow-up video where I put more games through its paces. And if you guys have any recommendations about games that I should be trying that don't work too well with emulation, please leave them in the comments below, because I really want to show everyone what this thing can do and maybe some of the limitations of the system. Well guys, that will do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, you know what to do. Leave me a thumbs up. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.